Like many other locations in St. Mary's County, this represents the history from the discovery of the colony almost all the way up to the present day, and lends itself to researchers and other folks who want to discover more about the history of St. Mary's County. One other component of the farm which is valuable to us, it's a preservation site in order to preserve that historical reference for others, but also to allow people to come to a place where they can see animals, farm animals, bison. Summerseat was originally homesteaded by the Reeder family roughly in the late 1760s, around 1768. Prior to that, the land itself went through several transactions of different members of the colonial society in St. Mary's County. But in 1768, John Reeder Jr., the son of Thomas Reeder, bought the initial 413 acres of Summerseat Farm from a name you might recognize, Thomas Key, of the very famous Key family, who had owned the property prior to him. Although there is some question as to if this was the original site of the homestead, there is belief that, and there are records to show, that the original homesteading site that John Reeder Jr. settled was about a mile and a half north of here on the current Dixon Farm. Starting with John Reeder Jr.'s daughter, Susanna, the farm has always been in the hands of a female descendant. Outsiders or people from other families married into it, and they may have controlled it because of the way things were done back then for real estate, where women didn't have rights of land and property. But it has always been in the hands of females up until about the 1930s. Around 1850, the Costigan family took over full control of the farm. The Costigans had about a half a dozen daughters and one son, who was unfortunately killed in 1862 after Lee's retreat from Antietam. The dowry of the farm then fell in succession according to age into each one of the 6 daughters. After the Civil War, St. Mary's County economy was devastated by the loss of primarily slaves who were emancipated in 1864 in Maryland. And therefore, all of the tobacco plantations and farms in the area had to either pay for hired hands or had to devise other methods to figure out how to pay their taxes and put food on their table. One of the options that the Costigan sisters exercised was utilizing the land, the property, and the house as a means to operate a boarding school. From what I understand and what I've read, they taught languages, they taught art, and they probably manners for young ladies of the late 19th century were also taught here. What we don't know is how many students at any one time were here, nor what led to them not having a boarding school, because I believe by around the early 1900s, they were no longer operating the boarding school, and it evolved back into a farm. On the farm itself, back in the graveyard, we have 2 American veterans buried there. One is a War of 1812 veteran, Clement Dorsey, who also happens to be a former U.S. congressman, a state judge, and a state legislator. The other American veteran that's buried there is Christopher Ireland Dorsey Costigan, who is the young man who was killed at Antietam in 1862. So it's important to understand that the house that you see here now was most likely not the original house on the property. The original house, or the manor house, for this tobacco plantation, which is what it was part of, probably existed down the road in Laurel Grove. The house that you see today is the second of 2 houses that were probably built on the property. The first one sometime prior to 1790 by either Dr. John Ireland or Dr. Gustavus Brown. And then after that house burnt down in 1873, the current house that you see on the property right now, the Victorian Queen Anne style, was built by the Costigan family. This land right here that we're looking at, and it's no accident we're on a high point, because this is pretty much a flat county for the most part, was picked out because of two things. Number one, strategically, it is close to a water tributary. So therefore, to get your crops to market, it was much easier to get it on a waterway that emptied to a bigger port where you could get it to market in England. Secondly, it's ideally located away from the shoreline, where weather would not have been much of a concern, and close enough to the county seat in Leonardtown where people could kind of stay current with what was going on. It's a good place to come and spend some time, get off the beaten path, and try to put yourself back in time. It is also a place where animals who are abandoned can be cared for and taken care of and pretty much brought up in the same environment you would expect them to be brought up on any working farm. And this is a working farm. We're probably the only farm within a couple of 100 miles that has a herd of American bison on its property. Visitors can come visit Summerseat during any open house events, which usually occur one weekend a month. I believe it's the first weekend of the month. Other than that, it's by appointment, but we have a very willing and accommodating staff of volunteers that if you reach out to them, they'd be probably more than willing to open up the grounds to you and for a slight donation, perhaps, spend some time here on the farm. It's important to note that the farm works almost exclusively, operates exclusively off of donations from the public.